Denny Hamlin and Kyle Busch. 15 years. Same team, same hauler, same war room. And then one podcast episode changed everything. What Hamlin said about his former teammate didn't just make headlines. It lit a fuse that had been sitting there for years. And when Busch finally responded, he didn't just fire back with words. He made a promise, a specific, deliberate, dangerous promise, the kind that only means something when the man making it has spent 2 decades proving he follows through. And here is what nobody is talking about loudly enough. That promise has already started being kept, on the racetrack, in real time, in ways that are now making the entire garage pay attention. But before we get to what Busch said, and more importantly what he did, you need to understand exactly what triggered it. Because Hamlin didn't just criticize a struggling driver, he did something far more specific, far more personal. And the fact that he did it the way he did, on his own platform, using knowledge only a 15-year teammate would have, is the part that made this impossible to ignore. Personally, I think what Hamlin did crossed a line that most people in that garage would never cross. But I want to know where you stand before this is over, so drop it in the comments when you get there. And if you want every story like this the moment it breaks, hit subscribe right now, because what is coming in this video, what Hamlin actually said, what Busch actually threatened, and what happened on that racetrack at Kansas is the kind of thing NASCAR does not forget quickly. Stay with this, because the part that made the entire garage go silent hasn't been told yet. To understand why this hit as hard as it did, you have to understand where Kyle Busch is right now, not who he was, where he is, because those are 2 completely different places. This is a man with 2 Cup championships, 63 Cup wins, a career that put him on the short list of the greatest drivers this sport has ever produced. Numbers that belong in the Hall of Fame conversation without argument. That is who Kyle Busch is on paper. What the paper doesn't show is what 2026 actually looks like. 24th in the standings through the first 8 races, winless in over 100 Cup starts. A 2-time champion who hasn't seen a Cup victory lane in so long that the question stopped being when and started being if. His only win of the entire 2026 season came in a Craftsman Truck Series race. Not the Cup car, the truck. That is the reality Busch is living in right now, and everyone in the garage knows it. The fans know it, the media knows it, and Denny Hamlin knew it better than anyone, because he watched it happen from close range. Now here is where the tension starts building, because Hamlin is not sitting in the same reality as Busch, not even close. While Busch is fighting to stay relevant, Hamlin is sitting 3rd in the 2026 standings. A win already on the board at Las Vegas, driving for the most powerful organization in the sport, co-owning a 2nd team, running a podcast with a real audience inside the garage. At 45 years old, Denny Hamlin is not slowing down. He is accelerating. 2 men, same sport, same generation, completely different trajectories in 2026. That gap between where Hamlin is and where Busch is exactly what made what happened next feel like a betrayal instead of just an opinion. On April 13th, 2026, Hamlin was recording an episode of his Actions Detrimental podcast. His producers asked him a question: who is the hardest driver to root for right now? There was laughter in that room. Everyone knew what name was sitting in the air, and Hamlin, rather than deflecting, decided to answer honestly. What followed was not a quick comment. It was a full breakdown of Kyle Busch's decline, delivered by someone who had 15 years of inside knowledge about exactly how Kyle Busch operates, about what Kyle Busch is capable of, about the gap between who Busch used to be and what the results are showing right now. Hamlin pointed to the trend. Not just this season, 5 years of it. He said the expectation that Busch would suddenly return to regular victory lane appearances was something the sport needed to let go of. That kind of honesty from a broadcaster is one thing. From a former teammate, someone who shared that garage, that hauler, those war rooms, it lands completely differently. But Hamlin didn't stop there. He went further. He said that a driver of Busch's caliber should be outperforming his equipment, that the greatest drivers find a way to carry a car beyond what the car is capable of. And then he made the comparison that sent everything sideways. He compared Busch to Austin Dillon, not a rival, not another championship-level driver. Austin Dillon, Busch's own RCR teammate, a driver who most of the garage would not put anywhere near the same sentence as a 2-time Cup champion. Hamlin's point was that if Busch is truly one of the greats, Mount Rushmore level as he put it, then he should be separating himself from that teammate, clearly, consistently, week after week. And it wasn't happening. That comparison did not stay inside the podcast episode. It went everywhere, and every person who heard it understood the same thing. This was not a stranger's opinion. This was an insider's verdict. What nobody knew yet was how Busch was going to respond, and when it came, it was not what anyone in that garage expected. Kyle Busch had almost a full week with those words before race weekend arrived at Kansas Speedway. A week to sit with a comparison to Austin Dillon from the man who once called him the greatest teammate he ever had. A week to decide what kind of response that deserved. When reporters found him during the media scrum at Kansas, Busch did not make them wait. He was not defensive. He was not emotional. He was completely controlled, and that made it more alarming, not less. He started with the car swap challenge. Direct, no hesitation. If Denny wants to switch cars, I'll switch cars with him. Any day of the week, any time. I'd love for him to show me that he can carry it better than I can. That line alone would have been enough to generate a headline, but Busch was building towards something. He talked about outside noise, said he consumed most of it over time, said 80% of the people making noise don't know what they are talking about. The setup was deliberate. He was narrowing it down, removing everyone else from the conversation until only one name was left. In this instance, I don't feel like Denny Hamlin even knows what the hell he's talking about. The room got quiet. Reporters stopped writing and started listening because the tone had shifted. This was not frustration. This was not defensiveness. This was a man who had made a decision about what came next. He can bash me all he wants. One more beat, one more second of silence before the last piece landed. I can certainly make his life hell. 7 words, and the moment they were out, every single person in that garage understood something important. Kyle Busch was not venting, he was announcing. This is a driver who has spent 20 years making life difficult for people on purpose, who blocked, bumped, and moved competitors when he felt it was warranted, without apology, without explanation, without hesitation. The rowdy reputation was not media invention. It was documented, race after race, across 2 decades of Cup Series competition. When Kyle Busch tells you he can make your life hell, the correct response is to believe him. Hamlin heard it, the garage heard it, and then everyone waited to see if it was really just a threat, or if Busch was already thinking about the next time their cars would be on the same racetrack. They didn't have to wait long. That Sunday at Kansas, with the race running toward its final laps, Busch found Hamlin on the track. Hamlin was pushing for a strong result. Every point matters when you're fighting for championship positioning with 10 races left before the chase field locks in. He needed clean air. He needed clear track. What he got was Kyle Busch. Twice in the closing laps, Busch held him up. Not a racing incident, not a mistake. Deliberate, calculated, and completely legal. The kind of move that leaves no room for complaint because nothing was broken and nothing was against the rules. Just a car in the wrong place, driven by someone who knew exactly what he was doing and why. The consequence was immediate. Tyler Reddick, who had been chasing Hamlin down, closed the gap that Busch had just created and drove to the win. Hamlin, who had entered those final laps with momentum, ended up watching someone else go to victory lane because of Kyle Busch. The threat had been delivered in words on a Saturday. By Sunday afternoon, it had already been delivered on the track. And here is the detail that made the entire garage stop and recalculate. Busch had absolutely nothing to lose by doing it. No championship to protect. No playoff position at risk. 24th in the standings with his Cup season already beyond recovery. He could park his car on the back bumper of anyone he chose and walk away from the weekend with 0 consequences to himself. Hamlin, on the other hand, had everything to lose. 3rd in the standings. A championship window that closes a little more with every race. Every point, every position, every finishing spot matters enormously in the final stretch toward the chase field. Busch understood that math better than anyone. The move at Kansas was not random. It was targeted precisely where it would hurt most. That is when the garage stopped treating this like a feud and started treating it like a problem, because the question now was not whether Busch would do it again. The question was when. But to understand why this situation carries the weight it does, why this is not just 2 drivers with hurt feelings, you have to go back to what these 2 men actually shared. Not the rivalry part, the other part. When Hamlin arrived at Joe Gibbs Racing in 2007, Busch was already there, establishing himself as one of the most aggressive and talented drivers in the sport. Two elite competitors, same team, same resources, same roof. What that produced was not a clean working partnership. It was something messier and more real than that. The 2010 All-Star race. Busch was sent hard into the wall, a block from Hamlin that he did not take quietly. He got on the team radio and said things that were not printable. Then he walked straight to the hauler. Hamlin was already there. Joe Gibbs himself stepped between them. That is how volatile this relationship was at its most combustible. Two men who had to be physically separated by their team owner inside their own hauler. But here is what makes this entire 2026 feud so much heavier than a simple grudge. Hamlin has spoken openly about what Busch gave him during those JGR years. He climbed into Busch's car at a Chicagoland Speedway test and felt how differently it was set up. How different it drove, and it changed everything about how Hamlin approached his own car from that point forward. From that point forward, I totally changed what I was looking for, Hamlin said. He credits that moment as the turning point in his development on intermediate tracks, the exact tracks where Hamlin now dominates consistently. So the man who sat on his podcast and said Kyle Busch has been struggling for 5 years, the man who said Busch should be carrying his equipment better than his teammate, built his own ability to dominate intermediate tracks by studying Kyle Busch's setups, by getting inside Kyle Busch's car and learning what fast feels like from the inside. When Busch said Hamlin doesn't know what he's talking about, he was not just defending his driving. He was saying something that only makes sense if you know that history. You learned from me. You built what you are on what I gave you, and now you are using that knowledge as the weapon. That is the betrayal the title promises. Not a podcast episode, not a quote. The source of the knife, and who was holding it. And now, with all of that on the table, here is the question this entire story is really asking. Was Hamlin wrong? He said publicly, using his own platform and his own name, that a former teammate and one of the sport's greatest drivers has been in decline for 5 years, and the sport needs to stop pretending otherwise. He was not anonymous. He was not vague. He was specific, on the record, and backed by results that are difficult to argue with. And when the blowback came, he did not delete anything. He stood behind it. Busch's side of that argument is just as clear. You do not use 15 years of insider knowledge to publicly dismantle someone who is already down. You do not compare a two-time champion to a mid-pack teammate on your own podcast and then act surprised when the response is nuclear. There is a version of honesty that helps someone, and there is a version that just hurts them publicly for the content. The garage is split on this. Privately, many people believe Hamlin said what a lot of people were already thinking, but would never say out loud. Some believe Busch's reaction, the threat, the blocking at Kansas, confirmed exactly the kind of instability that has made his situation at RCR so complicated. Others believe Busch had every right to respond the way he did, that Hamlin knew the consequences of what he was saying and said it anyway. Both of those things can be true at the same time. And that is exactly why this has not gone away, with races still remaining, with Hamlin fighting for a championship, and Busch having zero reason to make that fight easier. Every track they share from here is another chapter. Every closing lap where those cars end up near each other is another moment where a 7-word promise gets tested again. The feud is not over. The threat is not expired. And the next time Kyle Busch finds Denny Hamlin in his mirror during a final run, everyone in the garage will be watching to see what happens. So here is where we land, and this is the part I genuinely want you to weigh in on. Hamlin said what he believed was the honest truth about a man he still respects. Busch heard it as a public execution from someone who owes him more than that. One of them is right, maybe both of them are, but drop it in the comments right now. Was Hamlin out of line, or did Busch just hear a truth he wasn't ready for? Because the next race is coming, and so is whatever Busch decides to do next.